Okay, I don't know if I'm going to do this for all the chapters in the book, but I know that Android development can kind of be intimidating when you first get started. So I'm going to guide you through Chapter 2. So at this point, you've already created a Hello World app, which isn't much more than just creating a new project through Android Studio. But once we get into Chapter 2, we're going to have to start writing some code, and I'm just going to try and hold your hand through this chapter. We'll see how it goes. So bear with me here. You should be following along with me on these steps, and I'm just going to basically look at the book and follow the steps. Um, okay, so what we're going to do here is do File, New Project, and now I've actually already created this project, so I'm going to name it a little bit differently. I'm going to call it Beer Advisor 2. You can call yours just Beer Advisor, but I'm going to call mine Beer Advisor 2. And you can see here that this is something that I touched on in some of the Java review videos. This company domain and the package name are closely related, so this is just the default that Android Studio put in there for me, and I'm sure yours will probably have your username in there or something that's similar to this. We can just leave this as is. Once you start developing an app that you actually intend to deploy to the app market, then this will become more important. But in this class, we're not going to be doing that. So you can just leave it as the default. So, and then right here is the location where my files are going to be saved, where my project file is going to be saved, and I can just hit next here. And now throughout the book, we're going to use a minimum API level of 15. What this means is that if an Android device has an older version of Android installed on it, in this case, if the version of Android is older than Ice Cream Sandwich 4.0.3, then our app will not work on it. And in fact, if you came to the App Store and you have an Android phone that's running something older than Ice Cream Sandwich, then you won't even see this app on the App Store. They won't even show you apps that you can't install. So just something to be aware of. So we'll just leave this at the API level 15, and we'll hit next here. And then we're going to choose blank activity. We'll leave that as the default, so I'm going to click next. And now they want us, a lot of times I've just left this as the default, but in this, according to the book, they want us to make some changes here. So we're going to do they do? Okay, so they want us to call the activity name find beer activity, and I think that's all. That's the only change we need to make. Actually, Android Studio updated all the other fields for us, so everything should look like that, and I think that's okay. So I just changed the top line, and then everything else got adjusted automatically for me. So I'll go ahead and click finish here. And this is going to take a little while. It's got to generate all the files for us, and there's a lot of files. If you kind of poked around the file system over here, or the project structure, the folder structure of the project, you'll see there's a lot of folders. It's kind of overwhelming. Some of them we don't care about, but the ones that, but we'll get more into these different folders throughout the course. I also want to point out that one thing that can trip you up is, well, a couple things here. First of all, you can change your view of the folder structure up here. You can change it to project. And off the top, what is it? I can't remember. So I think that if you set it to project, it will show you a view of all the folders that includes all the build files and all that. And if I remember right, we just want to keep it to Android, and that will just show us the files that we care about when we're writing code. So don't need to worry about this too much. But I think sometimes you wonder why things change here, and it's because this drop-down may have changed. And I think we want to keep it to Android, and that will give us the views that we're looking for. And I can already see right now, so what's going on here is once we've created the new project, it defaults to loading this file, our main layout file, called activity underscore find underscore beer.xml. So this is the file that's loaded over here in the editor. And because this is a layout file, we've got this design view, but I've got a problem here. It's saying it can't. This error here is saying it can't render failed with a known bug. You can. Well, there's a couple things you can. I've seen this quite a bit in different variations of it. One thing you can do is if you look up here, this is saying that the emulator, or at least the design view. This isn't really an emulator, but this is the device that's in our design view is set to the Android version 22, API level 22. Now this might fix it, but it may not. But if there's a bug, from what I understand, there's a bug in Android Studio, and if this is set to 22, that might be the cause of it. So I'm just going to set it back to 21, and there it took care of the bug for me. I'm going to go ahead and set it back to 22 once, and then we might see that error again. Now I have done, on other occasions, click this button to try and rebuild the project. Let me just try this. This might work too. But what this will do is it'll re-import all the libraries that you need for your Android application, and it might fix it for us. So let's just see if this fixes it. If it doesn't, then I'll go back to the other way. And right now it looks like it hasn't. So I am just going to set this back to 21, and that'll take care of it. So now you can see when your project is first created for you, the first activity is made. Here's our find beer activity. Now this is the Java class that has the Java code in it, and then we've also got our layout file right here, and this is going to be the layout that goes with this activity. So right now we're looking at this layout file, and there's two views on a layout file. One is you can look at the code itself. So when I click down here on this tab, text, it's going to show me the XML code for the layout. Or you can toggle it back to the design view. And now with this view, you can actually drag. You can do drag and drop. So these are all the GUI components that are available to us. And I think the book actually, I think it's on page 44, they tell you to go ahead and drag a button on there. Now you can add your controls like this, and it can save you some typing, because if you notice what happened here is I just dragged that out to the design view, and I look over here, and now my code has changed. It's added this button. So it can save you time by using the design view. But for this chapter and for getting started, I think it's better to use the text view, because then you're typing in the code, and you'll get more familiar with what all these attributes are. And it looks like a lot of typing, but it's not so bad, because there's this autocomplete feature of Android Studio that will help you type. Makes things quite a bit quicker. So I've gone ahead and typed the code in on page 48. Hopefully it'll be on page 48 for you. The book's being revised a lot, so I don't know if they're going to change the page number by the time you have it. But I do want to show you a glitch that I ran into. So by default, there's this weird feature. I think this is a glitch in Android Studio, but when you use the autocomplete feature, so I'm going to just add another spinner in here and just to show you what's going on here. So you start typing, and then these are your choices that you can choose from, and if you hit return, it'll fill in the code for you, so that it kind of saves you time and reduces the possibility of you writing some errors. But when I press return here, or enter, now this window keeps popping up. It's some documentation window. It's really annoying, and I don't want it to happen. So I can close it like this, but what I really want to do is make it go away so it doesn't come up anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to File, Settings, and then in the search box type in code completion, and then it'll check this for you here. So we want to click on this one here, and this is the setting that makes that window pop up, auto pop-up documentation. So just uncheck that, hit OK, and then you won't have to deal with that anymore. I don't know if this is a glitch that will be fixed by the time you start using Android Studio. I can't believe that that's the way it's supposed to work, so I think it's a glitch. But anyways, I'll go ahead and delete that. And now at this point you should be able to go ahead and type in your code. I've deleted the button in the text view that I was just showing you a few minutes ago. I typed in the code from page 48. So this is what your layout file should look like when you're done. Pay attention to the details. There's lots of various lots of attributes that apply to these views, these components, and some of them are similarly named. I got tripped up between layout underscore align top and layout underscore align parent top. So you got to really pay attention to the details. Now the order of these doesn't matter. You could put these attributes in any order you want. Okay, so go ahead and type those in and then we'll move on. So I want to talk about string resources here. You can see here in the button component that the text attribute is set to button. So what does that mean? If I go over here in the design view, you can see that that's what shows up here. If I change this to hello, and if I go back over to the design view, you'll see that the button now says hello. So the Android text attribute is what sets the label for a control. But we don't want to hard code this in here. And the reason for that, there's a few reasons, but the one that the book mentions is for localization. So what that means is if we want our app to be used by users that speak other languages, French, Spanish, whatever, we don't want them to see hello here. So Android has a feature for dealing with string resources where the Android app will automatically detect the language that the user's phone is set to, and it will pull the labels from these string files. So if I wanted to, for example, have my app support Spanish speakers, I could create a new folder in this values folder, and I think it's ES for España so if I created a folder named ES and then I put another version of this strings file in here, then when Spanish speakers ran the app, the labels would come from the Spanish version of this strings file. Okay, I don't want to talk about that too much because we're not going to worry too much about localization. Now the other reason why these strings files are important is you might have a button that appears in numerous places throughout your app, and the button might say something like save. Well, if you decide later on that you want to change the button to submit, then you have to go through your code and look at all the places where you've placed that button. But by using a string resource, I can just change it in one place and it will cascade to all the places that are referencing it. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to go into my strings file, and I've already added, I think it's on page 50 for you guys in the book, I've added these two string items. So here's the name, this is how we refer to it in our code, and this is the actual label right here. So we added, and I think there's actually an error in the book because this one was empty, there was nothing in it, so I just put brands in there. Not sure why, if that's an error on their part or what. But anyways, so go into your values folder, into your strings.xml file, and then add these two entries. And once you've got those in there, then you can refer to those, and I'm going to take this out here, so I'm going to the button. Now the way to refer to these string resources is use the @ sign, and then followed by string, and then a /, and then the name that you gave that string resource. So in this case, it was find beer, and you can see the IntelliSense is picking it up for us. It knows that we saved our strings file, so it's showing up right here as the first item in the list. So if I hit return, it'll fill it in for us. So on page 51 is where they tell you to use the string resource for the button control and also for the text view here. So the text view is defaulting to new text, but we'll go ahead and change that one too. We'll refer to that other string that we created. So @string and /, and it's finding, the IntelliSense is finding brands there too. So I'll just hit enter there, and that'll put that in there for us. So now I'm just going to do Control Save to save this file. So at this point, you should be able to run your app, and you'll see your layout. None of these controls do anything yet because we haven't put the code in to actually respond to presses and things like that. So we'll be doing that. Go ahead and run your app in the emulator. I'm going to hit this run button right up here. Now you have to have had your emulator set up by now, and that should have been done. So I'm assuming you've got it set up, but you can go ahead and hit the run button right here. So after what seemed like an eternity, my emulator finally came up. I'm starting to experiment with different ways to set up the emulator to try and make them faster, but I haven't had much success yet. So it took a good 5 minutes or so before the emulator came up. Maybe it was even longer than that. It took a long time. So this is what I'm seeing now. Depending on how you set up your emulator, it might look a little bit different. But what you need to do here, and I've never actually seen this alert here, so I'm not really sure what that's all about. But for this Nexus emulator, you swipe up. So I just clicked and dragged up to unlock the phone or the emulator. And so here we can see our view. It's not very pretty. And actually, I went back and looked at the book, and you were supposed to keep that string resource blank. Though I thought it was an error in the book, but it's not. So anyways, now if you should be seeing something like this. If it doesn't look exactly like this, don't worry about it. Right, so I've just taken a little break and closed out Android Studio and opened it up again, and I just want to show you that you'll get these tips of the day a lot when you first fire up Android Studio. And I like to make a note of the keyboard shortcuts, so I've got a list going. And I will try and share that with you guys, even though I put a reference sheet up in the week 1 folder on a Blackboard. But anyways, so we're going to pick up where I left off, and hopefully this is helping. Sometimes I think these are just making things more confusing. But the next step in this project is going to be to add some values to that spinner, or they call it a spinner in Android, but you might know it more commonly as a drop-down list. So the way we left our app, it wasn't there was no values inside that spinner. And one way to add values to a spinner is to use the string resource file. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to go in the values folder, our strings.xml file, which we've seen before, and it's got some values that we put in here before. And oh, by the way, I made a mistake. This string resource is supposed to be empty. So that'll mean that our text view, which is basically a label in Android, won't be showing anything in it. And so that might not make a whole lot of sense right now, but once the app is finished, we'll see why we left that blank. So here's the code you're going to want to enter. I'm going to pause it while I type it in. You can go ahead and look at my screen or look at the book to type it in yourself. But so I've just typed those in. By the way, this is on the bottom of page 53. And again, we're in the strings.xml file, which is in the values folder. So I've gone ahead and added these here. So we've got an array of strings here in XML format. And the next thing we want to do is hook this up to that spinner GUI component so that these items show up in the drop-down list, or the spinner. And to do that, I'm going to go back over to our layout file, so activity_find_beer.xml. Click over here and go to my spinner component in the layout, and we're going to add another attribute. And it's going to be, so I'm going to just go down here to just before the closing angle bracket. I'll start typing Android : entries, and we are going to, the way you can refer to an array in the strings file is like this. And now this is on page 54 of the book. So we do the @ and then array / and then the name of the array. Now remember, back here in the strings file, we named this array beer_colors. So if I type in beer, and there's the IntelliSense to help me, so I'll just hit return. And I like to keep my code nicely formatted, so I'm just going to move the closing tag, or the closing piece of the spinner item, so that it looks just like that. And now I'm going to save it. And I'm going to go ahead and run the app. Now, like I said, I took a break, so I closed down the emulator. So I'm going to have to rerun the emulator again, and that's going to take a long time. So I'm going to spare you the agony of waiting for me to do it. But what I want to point out here is when you can fire up the emulator and just keep it running. And I can't remember if I mentioned this yesterday when I was working on this project, or the video for this project. But just fire up your emulator once. So I'm going to hit the run button here. And this takes a long time. Android Studio is not fast, but I've set up a whole bunch of different emulators, so when this thing finally comes around, I'll be prompted to choose which emulator I want to run this app in. So I'll make you bear with me while I wait for this portion of it, but after I select the emulator, I'm going to pause it because that might take up to 5 minutes. And now that's the reason why once you get your emulator up and running, just keep it up and running throughout your whole programming session, because then you don't have to keep relaunching it. It's the relaunching of it that really takes a long time. So if I have, so right here it's asking me to choose the emulator that I want to run this on, and I've been experimenting with different ones. I'm going to try the x86 one, Nexus 4 API 21 using the x86 system image. Now, I read somewhere that this would be faster than using the ARM v7 image, so I'm kind of playing around. They both seem pretty slow to me. Anyway, so I'm going to hit OK, and then I'm going to pause now, and it'll probably take a good 5 minutes or so. So I'll pause and then restart once. I'll pause the video and restart once it comes up. All right, so actually, I think the x86 version is faster than the ARM v7 because that didn't take 5 minutes to load up. Sometimes I think things get slowed down for me because I've also got this video capture software running too, which takes up a lot of resources. But so I'm starting to think that the x86 system image for my emulator is better than the ARM v7. The book tells you to do an ARM v7, but you can also set up another one using x86. Go back and check out, I think it's Chapter 1, if you want to set up another emulator. So I'll go ahead and press, hold, and drag to unlock this phone, and now if I click on the drop-down list, here I can see my choices from my string resource file. So in summary here, string resources are a very important part of Android development. So you can see here we created a string resource in the strings.xml file, and the value that we gave it was this, find space beer with the exclamation point, and we named this string resource find underscore beer, and we just referred to it in our layout code. So if I had 100 buttons throughout this app and they all wanted to use the same label, I could just refer them all to that string resource. So it makes it nice to make changes, like a save button or something like that. If you're using it all over the place, I mean, that's a great reason to use string resources. So it's bad habit to hard code values into your labels. And like the book pointed out, it's for localization purposes mainly, but also it's just nice to be able to make a change in one place and have the change cascade to all the other buttons that might be using the same label. All right, so let's move on to the next step in the project. 56, we are going to add some interactivity to our button here. We're going to add an on-click attribute. So this is a lot like web development, if any of you have ever done that, where you can add an on-click attribute to an HTML tag. We can do an Android :on-click here, and by the way, I'm in my activity _find _beer XML file, and then we can just type in the method name that we want to run. Now, you got to be careful with this because you got to make sure that the activity that uses this layout has this method. And there's some other little rules that the book discusses about what the method has to be a public method, and it has to have a void return type, and it also has to take a specific parameter too. So those details are in the book. But anyways, so according to page 56, we want to name that on-click, the value in the on-click attribute to be on-click find beer. So this is going to have to be the method that we create in our activity. And let's go over and do that right now. So I'm going to save this file. I'm going to go over to find beer. And now this is the first time we've actually taken a look in the activity class. And I'm noticing some things that might be a little bit different from the book here. But anyways, there's some boilerplate code that gets generated for you when you create a new project. So the onCreate and the onCreate options menu. Now, we're not going to worry about these ones right now, but I think they mentioned in Chapter 1 what the onCreate method does, and we'll be using this one heavily. Now, one of the things that I'm noticing is that this activity is extending action bar activity. And it's crossed out because it's been deprecated. Now, I can't remember if it's in this book or another book that I was looking at, but it explained the reason for that, so I'll have to go look that up and get back to you on that. But I'm just going to see what happens if I change this to activity as they have it in the book. All right, hopefully we won't get any problems with that. So the problem it's saying now is that I need to import this class because I haven't imported it. So I can do that using Alt plus Enter, and okay, so that should fix everything. So I think we're okay, but there's another little glitch that might throw you off, which is why I'm making these videos, is because the book doesn't always explain exactly everything that's going on here. So on page 57, they kind of explain a little bit about the onCreate method. I'm just going to skip down to where they actually put the method code in here, and that is on page 58. So it doesn't matter where inside the class I put the method, it can be anywhere. And actually, if I remember now, the book tells you to just delete some of this stuff. I'm just going to leave it as is, and I'm going to go right here underneath the onCreate method. Like I said, it doesn't matter where you put it, but here we have to create the method that we said was going to be there in the layout file. It's got to be a public method, and it's got to have a void return type, and we called it what was it, on click find beer. I don't know what I did there. On click find beer, and now it's going to take a parameter, and it's going to be, the parameter is going to be a view. Now, what is this parameter here? Well, it turns out that it's the thing that got clicked. So it's going to be a button. And remember, a button is a subclass of a view. So a button is a view. So anyways, this would allow us to figure out which button actually triggered this method, because Android, the operating system, will call this method for us when the button is clicked by the user, and it will pass the button in as this parameter here. Okay, and then our code for what's supposed to happen when the button is clicked will go right here inside this method. So what we're going to try and do here is take the value that is selected in the spinner of the drop-down, and when they click the button, we're going to take that value from the spinner and we're going to put it into the text view. That's all. That's all we're trying to do here. So there's a couple of things that we need to do to make that happen. First, we need to retrieve that value from the spinner. We need to get the selected value from the spinner. And before we can do that, we need to get a handle on the spinner from our code. So I'm going to type in the code for that. And we named that spinner color in our layout file. I'm going to explain this code in just a second here after I type it in, but you can go ahead and do it too as I'm doing it. Find view by ID, r.id.color. Okay, there's a lot of stuff happening right here. What we're doing here is we're calling the find view by ID method of the activity class. This is a method that's inherited from the activity class. Remember, our find beer activity inherits from activity over here. So this is a method of the activity class, and what we're passing into it is a resource ID. Now, this looks a little funny. I'm hoping that I can figure out a good way to explain this, but for now, just know that capital R dot ID dot whatever comes after here, in this case it's color, is how you get a handle on the spinner in our layout file. Now if I look over here, I gave this spinner an ID of color. So that's why this is r.id.color. Now I will try and explain what this r.id stuff is doing. I might save that for another video. The book, if I remember right, gets into it a little bit, but I think I might want to go a little bit more in depth right now. So find view by ID here. Okay, so this find view by ID, I just want to show you something really quick. If I put my cursor inside this method name somewhere, and if I do Control Q, hopefully this will work, this will pull up the documentation for that method. So if I look at it right here, you can see that it's a public method. It returns a view object, and then it takes an integer parameter. So this can kind of come in handy a little bit here. So I'm going to go ahead and close this window by going over here, clicking there, and so it returns a view. Now remember, all the GUI components are subclasses of view, but what we're trying to get a handle on is the spinner here. So what we need to do is cast it from the view object that gets returned by find view ID, cast it to a spinner, and then we can treat it like a spinner. So now if I go to, so my color variable is referring to a spinner. I don't like the variable name that they use for that. Color to me doesn't seem like a very good name for a drop-down list. I might like prefix it with SP or something like that to let me know that it's a spinner. But if I type in color dot get selected item, now this will return me the item that's selected. Now this get selected item returns an object, but in our case we used strings to populate the drop-down list, so we're going to want to get a string back. So in some cases you won't necessarily use strings to populate your spinners, and we might get into that later in the course. So what I need to do here is type in, use a string method here, and value of, and the code should look like this. And I think, let's see, how do they do it here? Let's skip ahead. So we're going to take that value that's selected from the spinner and assign it to a variable, a string variable, and they used beer type. I would use selected beer type just to be a little more explicit. You can use beer type as they did. Okay, so that's step one. We're actually pulling the selected value out of the spinner. Now step two is to take that selected value from the spinner and put it in that text view label control. So just like we got a handle on the spinner from our layout by using find view by ID, we're going to also do the same approach to get a handle on the text view. So we'll go text view, and let's see, what did they call it here? They called it brands equals, we have to do the cast here to text view, because find view by ID returns a view object, and we want to downcast it to the more specific text view that we know that it is. Brands. Okay, why brands? Once again, that's the ID that we gave to that text view control over in our layout file. So, and that is, here's our text view control, and you can see the ID that we gave it right here was brands. So that's how we get a handle on it from our activity code. Now, this should be everything we need. Oh, nope, I lied. So we've got a handle on our text view, and now we need to set the text on it so that it shows the selected beer. So we do brands. That's the variable name that we gave to the text view, and we're going to call a setter method set text, and then we're going to put in selected beer type here, or if you, that's the variable name that I gave it, it's slightly different. Now we've got some errors in here. I'm colorblind, so I can't see the red very well, but I know there's some there. But you can also see errors over here to the right. And so if I hover over here, these little red bars say cannot resolve symbol text view, cannot resolve method set text, cannot resolve method view. Now that's because we're using these classes, but we haven't imported them. So, and if I hover over this one, where was it? Where I hovered over. So what is it? To fix your imports in Android Studio, you do Alt plus Enter. So I'm holding down Alt plus Enter. And now what we didn't really see is all the imports should be put, and I'm not seeing them in here, so I'm still red. Let's do Alt plus Enter again. Alt plus Enter. Okay. Now that time, I'm not sure why it didn't work the first couple times, but now you can see that my imports popped into place here. So it imported the spinner and it imported the text view for me. And it looks like I've still got another error here. It did not import view. Now I'm not sure why it didn't do that. So I'll go over here and I'll do, maybe you got to have your cursor on it. So there, once I put my cursor in there and did Alt Enter, then it imported the view. Now Eclipse is a little bit nicer because you just hit the keyboard shortcut to import, and it imports everything that you're missing. So it looks like in Android Studio you got to do it one at a time. All right, I think that should do it. So now I can just run my app, and I've got my emulator still up and running over here. So I don't have to go through the long process of firing it up again. All I have to do is go over to Eclipse, or I'm sorry, Android Studio, hit the run button, and I believe it will prompt me for the emulator that I want to use, and I'll just choose the one that's already running, and then hopefully okay, so it's prompted me for the emulator I want to use. I'm just going to choose the one that's already running. I might have given you some false information a little step back there, but I'll just ignore that for a second here. So I'm just going to hit OK here. So it's detecting these are the running. This is just any emulators that are already up and running. So I've already got my emulator, you can see down here, up and running. And if I had multiple ones up and running, they would all be listed here, and I could choose the one I want to launch the app on. But here I'll just click OK, and then I'm going to switch over to my emulator. By the way, you can see a whole bunch of console stuff happening here. Those are log messages going on right here. These are just messages about what's happening in the emulator. We're going to get into these log messages a little bit more later, but I'm going to go ahead and pull up my emulator. And let's see here. Is it running? I might have to wait a little bit. So this is still running the old version of the app. So let's just see what happens here. Okay, this is a little bit confusing because I didn't actually see that my new version of the app was installed. So I just waited a little bit, and now I know the new version is installed because it's working the way I want it to. So I'll choose light here in my drop-down list and then press this button here, and you can see that that text view is showing the selected value from our spinner here. All right, that'll do it for that portion. So I am looking at page 66 of the book, and this is where we build a plain old Java class, and it's going to contain our application logic. So what it's going to do is we're going to feed it in we're going to give it a beer type or a brand, and then it's going to return some choices within that brand. Now you could easily put this code inside your activity class, but as far as code design goes, it's a good idea to put your application logic in a separate class. So we're going to build a class that that holds all of this application logic in it. So I'm not going to type through the whole class with you. I'll have to let you do that by yourself just to shorten the video up. These videos are starting to run really long, I'm noticing. I'm going to try and make them a little more concise as I move forward. But anyways, I just want to show you how to get started here. So I've got Android Studio up and running, and here is my folder structure for my app. Now if yours looks a little bit different than this, you might want to check this drop-down list. It should be on the, you should have it to the Android setting, and this will show you the files and folders that are most relevant to you as you're coding the app. So if we go into the Java folder, and now you can see here are packages, and I don't think the book mentions this, but there's two packages that the Android Studio makes for you by default. One is the package that's going to have all your code in it, and then the other package is for testing, for unit testing. We're not going to get into unit testing in this course at all, so you can basically just ignore this package. So I'm going to drill down into our app package here. And now yours might look a little bit different than mine here. Mine's got my name in it, and I can't remember what we said when we were setting up the project. It doesn't really matter what yours says here. Don't worry about it if it's different than mine. So I'm just going to right-click on this and do New, and then Java class. And if they tell us to name the class Beer Expert. So that is how you do that. And here's my class. Now I'm going to pause it right now while I go ahead and type in all the code for it. And you guys should go ahead and type in the code right now too. It's right there on page 66. So here we go. I suppose you wouldn't necessarily have to go look at the book. You could just wait till I typed it in and then pause the video and then enter your code, the code that you see right here. I want to point out, this is not good practice. This is not code. This is not good code design here. Normally, you would never want to just hard code all these values into your logic class. In a real app, we'd probably have some sort of data store, like a SQLite database, or maybe a web server out on the internet that we hook up to that provides all of our data. So this is just for the purposes of demonstration, just to get that out there. So the next step is to use this class inside of our, inside of our activity. Excuse me. So I'm going to switch over here to our activity. And by now you should be starting to realize that Android applications are built using activities, which you can basically think of as a screen. So each screen in your app will have an activity. And hopefully you're starting to understand how the layouts come into play too. The layouts are actually the visual portion of the screen. The activity provides the code or the behavior for the screen. Really important concept in Android development, and hopefully that's starting to sink in at this point. So I am going to switch over to the Find Beer activity. Double click on that and that'll bring it up in here, and what we want to do is create an instance variable in this class, the activity class, for our Beer Expert class. So and they make it here. This is on page 69 of the book, or you can just wait till I type it in and then copy what I put in. So it's a private variable. Beer Expert is the data type, and they name it Expert here. And by the way, I really don't like a lot of the naming conventions they use in this book so far, and I'm really tempted to use my own, and I think I've done that already, but you might have to bear with me on that, because I just disagree with the way they use some of the variable names. I just think they're confusing. I'll try and point them out when I see them. So we're going to call the constructor of our Beer Expert. So we do new Beer Expert, just like that, and that should do it. And now what we want to do is, so what we're doing, just in a recap, is when the button gets clicked on our layout, this method's going to run right here, on click find beer. We're going to get the selected value from the spinner control, and then we're going to take that value and we're going to pass it to our Beer Expert, and our Beer Expert is going to return some choices. So what we're doing is we're passing in a color of beer. I'm no beer expert, and I think I made a mistake earlier. I said like a brand of beer, but it's really a color of beer, and it's going to return us some beers that are of that color. So here's our on-click find beer. This is the code that runs when that button gets clicked. And we want to stick that in. So right now, let's see what's going on here. I'm going to pause for a second. So currently what's happening here is that we're just taking the color that they selected and showing that in our text view. But what we're going to do with our beer expert is, instead of showing the color, the selected color in that text view, we are going to show the options for beer types of that color. Again, a text view, you can think of that as a label in Android. And this always threw me off when I was first getting started with Android development, because I always thought of these as input boxes where you actually enter text, but they're not. They're just labels that display data. I come from a web development background, and to me a text view seems like an input box, but in Android those input boxes are called edit texts. Anyway, so just like the spinner, you'd think they'd call it drop down, but they call it spinner. They have kind of weird naming conventions in Android. So what we're going to do here is before we put anything into that text view, we are going to consult our beer expert. So we are going to I'm going to pause and type in some of the code here. Okay, so I've inserted this code right here, and you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to show you how to put up your line numbers. That'll be helpful, but I got to figure out how to do it first here. Like I said, I'm still learning Android Studio myself. Okay, so I quickly dug around a little bit, and if you go here into File, Settings, and then right here in Appearance, under the Editor group, there'll be Show Line Numbers. So let's see if that works here. So if I check that checkbox and hit OK, now you can see all my line numbers along here, so that might make it a little bit easier. I can just say, so the code that I just typed in right now is I inserted this chunk of code from line 29 down to line 34. And we're going to have to make one more change here. So just to go through this really quick here, we're getting the selected beer type from the spinner. Now I deviated from the book here, and I called it selected beer type, but as I look at the book over here, I'm seeing that it's called what are they calling it? They're just calling it beer type here. So hopefully I won't be confusing you when I change the variable names. Just be aware of that, and I'll try and point it out whenever I need to. But anyways, the book uses beer type. I just use selected beer type. So we take that selected beer type and we pass it to our beer expert, and our beer expert is going to take that beer type, which is really just a color of beer. A little bit confusing. So it's going to take that color of beer and return a couple of beers that are of that color. And so that's what's going on here. So we're getting a list back from our get brands method of the beer expert, and then we're creating a string builder. Now I'm hoping you've all used string builders before. It's just a great class for when you're concatenating strings, and it's a lot more efficient than just doing plain old string concatenation. If you're not familiar with the string builder, look it up. It's pretty straightforward. Instead of using the plus sign to concatenate strings, you just call the append method of the string builder. And so what's going on here is the get brands method of the beer expert returns an array list of strings. And this goes back to our Java review project. If you haven't started on that, I suggest you do it right away. I gave you guys some extra time to do it, but it should be the first thing you do really for the course. And we're going to loop through that list that gets returned, and we're going to build our string with our string builder. So we just append we're basically taking that array list, looping through it, and sticking all of the colored beers that get returned into one string. So here this is each string in that list. And this is an enhanced for loop, and you should be familiar with this too. And every time we insert the colored beer type into our string, we also add this here, this \n, which is an escape character, and that'll put our return carriage in our text view for us. So you'll see that in just a minute. Now I need to make sure I set something here. This is not right. Right now, down here, when we go to our label or our text view, we're setting it to the selected beer type. We no longer want that. So what we want to put in here is our brands formatted. just like that. And I think that should do it, and I actually think that that might be the end of this project here. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And I'm going to run it. So I'll click the run here. And you'll notice, I don't think I've mentioned this before, but you'll see a lot of action going on in your consoles down here when things start to run. Well, actually, first I've got to specify which emulator I want to use. So Android's taking a long time. I mean, Android Studio is taking a long time. We know that already. So I'm just going to pause it for a second. So finally, after about a minute or two, maybe, this window is popping up, and it's asking me which emulator I want to run this app on. I'm just going to stick with this Nexus 4 API 21x86 that I created. Yours might be a little bit different than mine, but I chose to use the x86 version rather than the ARM v7 that the book told you about, just because I think it's faster. So I'm going to hit OK here, and I'm going to pause my screen capture again because this will probably take a while too. Just going to point out here that as my emulator fires up, I'm seeing something I've never seen before here. This Android is upgrading. I've never seen it before. A lot of this Android Studio stuff is new for me. Okay, here we go. We can see, all right, looks like my emulator is up and running, but it's locked. So to unlock it, I'm going to do my click and drag from the bottom here. And I guess I click OK here. And hopefully it should launch right into my Beer Advisor app, and here it comes. And here we go. So let's find out if it worked. So I'm going to choose an amber beer, and there we go. So our beer expert returned 2 beers in the form of a list, and we took those two beers and concatenated them together into a string using the string builder, and we put a line break in between each string, which is why we're seeing a line break here in our text view. All right, I think that will do it for now. Oh, one more thing, just to submit your app, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make sure that I click on my emulator, and I'm going to hit Alt and print screen on my PC. Now, if you're using a Mac, it's a different, you can take a screen capture in a different way, and I can't remember how it is, but it's on Blackboard, so check it out. But I'll just hold the Alt and print screens here. Now that's going to take a screenshot of my emulator, and then I'm going to go over to Word here, pull up Word, and do a new Word document, blank document, and I'm just going to go ahead and paste that in there. So I'm hitting Control V to paste it. So there is my app, and this is what I'm going to have you submit for your assignment here to me. For now, we're going to submit the assignments like this, but I think in the future I might actually have you submit the code to me. We'll see how it goes. Once you get your screenshot here, you can either paste it in a Word, or you can if you can figure out how to get the image itself, you can upload the image to turn in your assignment. But this is what I'm looking for what you submit to me.